Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for coming. What I thought I would do today, since you're involved with design and involved with sustainability, I'll try to focus on those two notions, design and sustainability, and talk about perhaps about the meaning of both, and see how you take it. Just a couple of words. I think Sandy mentioned Buckminster Fuller. I met Fuller as a young student of architecture at the AA. I actually met him right in the beginning of the first semester. And that, of course, changed my trajectory after that. In those days, Fuller was advocating an incredible, typical Fuller program. He called it the World Design Science Decade. This is in the 60s, essentially, mid-60s, where he was already dealing with many of the issues that we call sustainability today. And the idea of that program was that all the architectural schools in the world, all the students of architecture in the world, will collaborate on a 10-year program to redesign the world. And of course, I never heard any such concept before. I always thought of design as something to do with object. You design a chair, or you design a house, or so to think about the planet as an object of design was a very major kind of earth-shaking concept. And I think that really shook me to a degree that I've been kind of following the meaning of that inspiration, if you will, ever since. And the most recent kind of step in that direction of fulfilling that concept was the establishment of the Sustainability Laboratory. The notion there was to try and establish an agile, independent entity that would see its mandate as developing a portfolio over time, a portfolio of showcase demonstrations of approaches to different issues that relate to sustainability. And this is after many years of working within the multilaterals, the World Bank, UN agency, the environmental global conventions, and so on, and becoming increasingly impatient with the huge gap between the rhetoric of sustainable development and what's actually happening in the ground. I felt that there was not a rigorous enough understanding of what sustainability means, although everybody was talking about that's what we want to do. And there was certainly not any set of guidelines, of principles that anchored that concept in something real. And the idea was with the lab to create this instrument that will first develop such principles and perhaps review the definition of sustainability in the first place, and then begin to demonstrate the application of these in different kinds of projects on the ground. And I tried to be very careful not to define what the lab will do with the typical ways by problems areas like climate change or biodiversity. This is how the world has approached those issues mostly. So you find in most of the multilaterals, for example, there'll be groups that deal with climate change and groups that deal with biodiversity and so on, and usually they don't talk to each other. And you get experts on water, or experts on energy, or experts of biology, and the problem that you are familiar with. So I thought I'll take you, I'll ask you to join me on a big jump for a minute and look at some very interesting concept that will perhaps hone our thinking when we think about the broader context of what is going on here. And the first thing that I'd like to show you, you're all familiar with the Hubble telescopes and this magnificent show that they're making available. This thing here, which is called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, is a very extraordinary photograph. It's basically the deepest portrait of visible universe that humans have been able to produce. This is going about 400 million years after the Big Bang. So you have here a snapshot of reality almost 13.3 or something billion years ago, if you can even imagine what that means. It's significant on I think, on two levels. One, that humans are able to penetrate that far back try to imagine what it means. You are really looking here at the very moment of the birth of the cosmos. 400 million years ago, where the first clusters of galaxies began to form. The other thing that is very significant here is that in that snapshot, which is the radius, the kind of the aperture of about 1/10 of the diameter of the moon out of 360 omnidirections, so it's a tiny portion of the universe. You have here about 10,000 galaxies. And if you think that it's only not much more than 100 years ago that we thought that the Milky Way was a cosmos, you get a glimpse of the huge revolution in our concept of what our reality is, but also of the dynamic nature of that reality. So 10,000 galaxies here in the tiny little spectrum, and we're looking here all the way back to as far as you can reach in the past. Of course, you also realize that much of this doesn't exist anymore because of the time that light has taken to travel to us. Many of those particular galaxies have been transformed into something else entirely by now, and so on. And it's that transformation and that dynamism that I want to emphasize with you a little bit here. You have here this picture of a portion of the Swan Nebula, about 3 light years across, and you remember that the speed of light is about 178,000 miles per second, so you know what the light years means. This is about 3 light years across. It's 5,500 light years away, and the significance of this is here you have basically an immense cloud of the gas that are being sculpted by ultraviolet light. And it's in this environment that, young massive stars are being formed all the time. So you've got those massive clouds of gas where things kind of consolidate into the stars. So these are basically hotbeds for star formation, factories of making stars, and this process is going on all the time, continuously. If you think about most of our kind of enshrined concept of creation and universe as something that occurred once, this is a process that is continuing all the time. And another picture, of course, a similar region, this is a very famous picture of the gas pillars of the Eagle Nebula. It's another area of star formation, another factory of stars. And this is where, as before, where simple elements begin to coalesce into things that begin to form into stars. I have another photograph here that is really remarkable. I think until 1987, this is a photograph. It's not a simulation. It's not a drawing. Until 1987, basically there was only one solar system that was known, and that was our own. And since 1987, I think there have been discovered a whole lot of other solar systems, some with planets in them and so forth. This is actually a photograph of solar system information. You have here, it's a photograph that was taken by Adam Krauss and the team at the Institute of Astronomy in Hawaii. And what you have here is is a solar system information about 450 light years away. You can see basically you have the star in the center surrounded by a huge disk of dust and clouds, and right in the middle there you see that little planet that is being formed, and this is the youngest known planet. Scientists figure out that this began to coalesce about 50,000 years ago, so this is a relative baby in the thing. But again, that amazing thing of being able to look at the thing like this and seeing a thing in the process of creation, in the process of becoming, in the process of actually happening. So when you look at all this environment, all this cosmic stuff, I think that you can make a distinction between 2 fundamental regions. Regions in which energy is being diffused, like all those clouds that we've seen, and regions in which energy is being compounded and coalesced and becomes something else other than the tropic forces. And of course, one of the most obvious energy compounding region in our known universe is Earth itself. If you begin to think about this in that way, and in contrast to all those places that just emit energies around, this is a place like we have our sun that obviously is a totally entropic process emitting all these energies, and those energies, all this solar radiation is being compounded into exquisite configurations on Earth. A very how to say, a very low probability region in space. I'm saying low probability, of course, because if you took, I'll come back to that low probability in a minute. So here, in that region which compounds energy, order and complexity are being formed continuously. And complexity, I don't mean complexity in the sense of being too complex, but complexity in the sense of complexification, in the sense of Teilhard de Chardin, that you have order created and that order is becoming increasingly more comprehensive, if you will. And this process manifests itself, of course, in a whole slew of things. The formation of complex molecules, the appearance of organic molecules, all form of life on the planet, whole ecosystems, and of course consciousness itself. So again, all of this is being produced by things that are diffused in one way and concentrated, or processes of concentrations on others. And again, I mentioned the low probability. This is against all odds, if you think about it, because if you take anyone and show them a cubic mile of cosmic space, there'll be nothing in it. There won't be even statistically even one hydrogen molecule. So if you took a good scientist and brought him to that place and say, what is the likelihood of life? What is the likelihood of what we take for granted, the trees and the butterflies and the cities and civilization? They tell you zero. So we are basically a zero, statistically a zero probability reality. And yet we are there, and I think it's hugely significant, and I think it's very important that we begin to think of ourselves and what is our role in all of these things, in all of this reality, in these kind of terms. So basically, when you talk about diffusion and this compounding, there are two basic forces, or two basic regions here. There are forces of entropy that obey the law of the second law of thermodynamics, where disorderliness and entropy continuously happen, the direction of that thing to happen. And then, of course, areas where order creation. And some people, like Fuller, but also Norbert Wiener, who was the father of cybernetics, were speculating, they began to ask themselves, what is the function of humans in the universe? When you look at ecosystems, almost every component has some function that goes beyond itself, right? Like bees may think that they're there to gather nectar or so forth, but at the same time, they're also cross-pollinating plants and so forth. And the speculative answer that some of those thinkers came up with, that humans are an anti-entropic function in the universe. Right? The minds of humans is the most powerful anti-entropic tool that we can know. Although we don't always behave in that way and we create a lot of mess, there is the potential there to create order and amplify order in a massive way, which is what design is all about, if you'll think about it that way for a moment. So I want to take you through a series of statements. When you look at this, if you once you contemplate this giant, unfathomable, but dynamic, constantly changing reality, there's a sequence of ideas that are very exciting, I think. The first is that you can begin to look at the universe as a gigantic kaleidoscope. Gigantic kaleidoscope in a way that kaleidoscopes are, you're familiar with those, where basically all the parts, all the components, all the essence of it continuously intertransforms. Things interact continuously. they intertransform, they always interaccommodate. They cannot, other than interaccommodate, interact, interaccommodate, and intertransform continuously. And all are basically various manifestations of oneness, right? And this is a concept that has been with us for a very long time in most basic wisdom tradition, that concept of the oneness that is behind this multiple show. So the universe is a kaleidoscopic flux of constantly transforming event. Means that reality, what we call reality, which incidentally, if you think about it, is a very questionable thing. We tend to think of reality as something very real, and you're dealing with real estate. But the point that much of what we see doesn't exist anymore, right? Because of that speed of light. The star that we see today has been burnt out a long time ago. So reality is such a fascinating thing, and the interaction of intellect with that reality and how it forms perception is a fascinating subject in its own right. But what we have here is a very complex, gigantic kaleidoscope, if you said, where reality continuously reorders itself. And the significant part of that statement is that human activities, in all their aspects, our concepts, our actions, whatever we do, are really part of this gigantic self-organizing system. Incidentally, I think that part of the pathologies, part of the issues that brings us to many of the problems that we have related to sustainability is this conceptual separation of us and the world, us and nature, us and environment, and so forth. Instead of emphasizing the fact that we are really part of it and part of that process, and a very important part because we can actually do mind over matter. We can configure parts of reality in preferred ways, and that brings to mind the question, what is preferred? And of course, preferred should be seen as how comprehensive can you be in your concerns and what you design for and so forth. So human activities is part of this self-organizing process. And again, one fantastic aspect that I already alluded to in all of this, which is quite fascinating, is the ability of the human mind to penetrate that reality and distill its essence, understand what is going on there, and distill the essence of that order, which is, of course, what we do with that is express it express that essence in what is called by science generalized principles, right? Things like E equals mc squared and so forth. These are basically expressions that capture the essence of that reality, and they're basically tools. This kind of formulas are basically tools that allows you the way of leveraging what you do and applying that mind over matter and really do things in preferred way. Now, order creation, which is what we're talking about here, order creation is obviously at the heart of the concept of design. This is what design is all about, is creating some sort of order, right? Do you agree with that statement, incidentally? That design is about creating order? Right? Good. I'm happy about that. So order creation is at the heart of the concept of design, and what it really means in the most abstract sense is the conscious application of intelligence to arranging and rearranging and optimizing preferred configurations. We're applying matter over molecules and stuff and reconfigure it in ways that are not natural, so to speak, in the environment, and kind of wrestle some advantage from those configurations. And this is fantastically important concept because, and incidentally, this doesn't apply only to bits and pieces of physical reality. This is true for cultural, not only physical component, but physical, whatever we call social, cultural, institutional, and legal thing. This is the design as the concept of shaping reality. And this is the power that we have to reshape that reality. And it's all of these aspects of design there are really the blueprint that shapes society and really channel at the end human activity. Right? So when you design an institution, when you design a law system, when you design an economy, you're really shaping your own reality. And this is where humans can really participate in evolution itself. There's an evolutionary process here that started with those clouds that has no form and start consolidating into those solar system, and suddenly all the things begin to emerge, and suddenly this capacity to begin to arrange like the chairs, if you will, in that room in ways that have some advantage is so one of the nicest definitions, I can't remember the name of the fellow that it came from, and I have to make sure the next time I show it around I'll have it. One of the most beautiful definition of design that I found is this one here, that design is the deliberate channeling of energies that otherwise would be diffused. Design is the deliberate channeling of energy that otherwise would be diffused. So you can see here design as a concept of fundamentally an anti-entropic process. This is what design is about, is to reverse or arrest entropy. And I think that concept of design as a process of arresting entropy has to be at the heart of understanding what sustainability should or would mean and how to go about it. Because, as I'll argue a little later, we have an industrial economy that is, by its nature, extremely entropic. And really, we're burning up the ship, so to speak. And how to reverse that is an interesting thing. And maybe that is the whole meaning of being human, is the ability to exercise this anti-entropic, arresting entropy in your environment. And that's true for personal life as well as social life and the whole planet in that regard. And I would offer to you that kind of the worldwide transition to a sustainability regime is the ultimate design challenge. This is really what design should be about. This is the challenge that is offered to our generation, to this time in history. And this is important because when you look at pictures like this, which I'm sure you've seen those night sky satellite pictures of the Earth, you have here the whole Earth and a picture of Europe here. This is a picture of entropy in action. What you're seeing here is basically burning all those fossil fuels incidentally in a very low efficiency rate, plus all the impacts of increasing temperatures and polluting and so on. But basically this is burning up. This is exactly the opposite of syntropy. We are burning up all these exquisite hydrocarbon molecules that took hundreds of millions of years to consolidate. And, you know, the party kind of goes on, but that's obviously not the right way to go, and this should not be the source of energy that lights the world in this fashion. So we want to get back and think about it. Now that we understand a little bit what design is all about, let's think about sustainability a little bit. And one of the problems with the term, of course, is that it's been used now extremely liberally. Everyone talks about sustainability, and it's appearing everywhere, including whether the message of the political campaign is sustainable. When you look at some of the multilateral institutions that were very quick to internalize the concept, like the World Bank, people talk about sustainable loans. And you think that they're talking about loans that are given to projects that manifest the concept of sustainability. No, what is meant is whether the loan will be repaid, right? And so forth. People talk about corporate sustainability as though the sustainability of the corporation is the goal, and so on. So there's a lot of misunderstanding there, and the definition that was offered by the Brundtland Commission, that is transgenerational, right? The sustainable development is development that takes care of current needs without jeopardizing future generation, is not really very helpful in that regard. When you think about it, it has really no operational meaning. Nobody can really sit and tell us what would be utility value for future generations. It's a concept that is very difficult to compute. On the other hand, it's a definition that within the context of the UN, where decisions have to be made by consensus, everybody could agree to, because it's meaningless, right? So you can focus on the lowest common denominator. Nobody would argue that we shouldn't we should not take care of future generations. So that became the norm, but it's not something that offers you any rigorous operational guidance. Now, when you think about sustainability, about the term and what it ought to mean, perhaps, one would realize very quickly that the concept pertains to a particular kind of balanced interaction between a population and the carrying capacity of its environment. You've got the population on one side, the carrying capacity on the environment. It's basically a system state. It's a balance, it's a point of equilibrium in the interaction of those two. And that interaction is very particular. It's a circular interaction in which the two sides of the equation continuously affect each other. They basically make each other. They co-create, so to speak. They're not independent. They co-create all the time. And if you think about it, in fact, the whole history of our planet is a history of particular kinds of chemical circumstances, if you will, that allow the formation of certain kind of organism that, as they evolved, began to change the very composition of the biosphere itself that made possible other. So the biosphere of our planet before plants and animals existed was completely different. And it was changed by the plants, by the microorganisms, by all of those kind of things. So those two continuously affect each other and define each other in this very dynamic process. So the notion of sustainability then is not a one-time point. It's a point of equilibrium that varies with the circumstances of those interactions. And what is important is to try and focus on a definition of that point of equilibrium at each time, at each given time. When you look at this circular thing in a higher level of resolution, you have this picture here, where you have population on one side and carrying capacity on the other. The population at any given time, the scope, the size, whatever, of any population at any given time is a result of a fairly complex system, interacting system of things like growth rate and mortality and death and birth rate and fertility rates and so on. And all that interaction is not entirely understood, incidentally, to people who deal with human demographics. But the population impacts the carrying capacity of an environment. Incidentally, when you think about that circle, population carrying capacity, it can be any population, any environment. It could be amoeba in a petri dish, or elephants in the savannah, or humans on a planet. So when we talk about human population, like here, the population actually exerts its impact on the carrying capacity through its activity. Obviously, it's not just the size of the population, but also the rate of its activity. And that activity impacts the carrying capacity through two basic channels. One is the demand on resources. You see, every population actually transforms the environment into itself, right? This is one of those interesting transformations that we talked about before. You take bits and pieces of the environment that become you. And even you are not you as a static thing. You know how many cells are being discarded every day and so forth. So basically, over a certain period of time, you transform yourself completely by intaking of bits and pieces of the environment, so to speak. But anyway, the population impacts the carrying capacity by demand, or by the use of resources on one side, and on the other by generation of byproduct. Every physical process has to generate some byproducts, whether heat or others, and these have to be absorbed by that environment. The environment is actually a gigantic sink that absorbs those byproducts. And that point of equilibrium has to be such that you don't overutilize your resources, and you don't overwhelm your environment with your byproduct. And that's exactly what has happened since the Industrial Revolution, with the tremendous amplification of human, not just population, but human activity. We've been using resources, and everybody talks about this these days. It's an obvious thing. People compute how many planets you will need in order to continue with the rate of activity, the rate of use of resources that we have today. And of course, we are polluting the waters, the ocean, the air, everything else. And now, pollution, incidentally, is another misnomer, because basically there's no dirty chemistry, there's no dirty molecules. There's only molecules in the wrong place. And in the wrong sense, in the wrong place, in the sense that they create pathologies when they're concentrated where they shouldn't be. And again, that's what we have been doing in the last 300 years in a very big way. So looking at this kind of concept, and the concept that is pegged or anchored in the interaction of population and environment, the definition that I would offer to you is that sustainability is a dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and environment such that the population can develop to express its full potential. We don't know where it goes, and there's no reason to restrict it with any knowledge that we have at the time. So population develops to express its full potential, but there's only one condition, that it can do whatever it wants in its evolution, as long as it doesn't produce irreversible adverse effects on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. So to read it again, sustainability, a dynamic equilibrium and process of interaction between a population and the environment such, and its environment such, that the population develop to express its full potential without producing irreversible adverse effects on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. And it's this equilibrium that is, it's that equilibrium that is currently out of whack. This is the essence of that whole challenge that we face. It's that equilibrium that is out of whack. And this is, of course, because of the very rapid increase of human population that you're all familiar with, and with it, all the huge amplification in human activities. And you have here something that shows, and they all follow the same kind of graph, the world industrial production, the actual that kind of concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere that now we've learned has some significance in climate change and so forth. The world energy use. The world energy use in particular I find extremely significant because, as you see, this is a relatively old portrayal. It goes only to 1990, and a lot has happened since. If you think, let me see if my, no, if you think about somebody, I was born somewhere here, and you see what has happened in less than one generation's lifetime, the huge amplification of uses of energy. All of those sources are basically fossil fuels, all of those sources, and this is without taking into account the last 20 years with Brazil and India and China entering the equation. So if we were to redraw it to 2012, we'll need like Al Gore, you know, a ladder to go up and point you where the things are. And remember that these are all finite sources. These are fossil fuels that are finite. We're building a whole civilization on that basis that is obviously not sustainable in any kind of imagination. So that being out of equilibrium is what manifests itself in all the things that we look at as the environmental issues. They're not environmental issues. They're not issues in them. These are all symptoms of that system being out of equilibrium. And that being out of equilibrium then manifests itself in things like the ozone depletion, the climate change, biodiversity, all the list of bad things that we'll have to wrestle with and design for in ways that we are not actually doing now. So when you look at this thing, you can say, oh my God, all this problem that we have. When you look at those things, you may want to ask the question, what's going on here? What is going on? We are hearing all this bad news everywhere. What is going on? And it seems to be that there are three essential perspectives to this. One says that basically there's no problem. You know, basically the science is not really there yet. We don't really know. The data is not yet in. Basically business as usual. And this is unfortunately where most of the world is still, where most political systems are still there. These are minor issues. We'll deal with it as we can along the way. And meanwhile, everybody is busy with all kinds of sideshows, which are the train goes straight into the wall, and everybody is having all kind of parties and dealing with all kind of nonsense that have nothing to do with the challenge, the design challenge that we're faced with. The other perspective is to say that what is happening here is that the size of humanity was small in relation to the planet that was large. The human economy is expanded, the human population increased. Now we are a bigger reality, and the environment is small, and therefore we have to retreat. It's very interesting. This is the basic perspective of some of the most intelligent and powerful environmental economists, like Herman Daly and many others, who were able to fantastically grasp and express the dilemma and analyze why we have those problems. But when they come to solution, basically say what we need to do is retreat, kind of stop all this activity, maybe reorganize locally in pastoral communities, almost like medieval days, and that's how we can handle with the planet. But I think the genie is basically out of the bottle. There's no way to arrest that. You cannot tell people who see development in one part of the world don't want to develop in the same way. So I think this is really not the... So there's the third perspective, which really says that what we are seeing in those problems is really results of a conflict between a new reality trying to manifest itself. It's being held back with all the ways of doing things from yesterday. And that holding back, that conflict creates all this disease, if you will, all these manifestations of a problem that we're looking at. And I find this perspective tremendously powerful because it relates to everything I was talking earlier about design, that it's really, it's not something that is given. It's up to us to reconfigure things in a way that will maintain that point of stability. And I don't think we even have the slightest concept yet about the possibilities that are offered by that cosmic reality to our consciousness. I mean, if you look at some of the, you're all familiar with the fantastic impacts of the information revolution, which again, it's only the beginning, and how it changed the world entirely. But some of the more recent activities research that is not popularly really very much known about material sciences. The things that are happening that are going to completely change the future and the possibilities of humans and how to interact and how to organize ourselves, how to design our reality in ways that we can't even dream yet of. And as I said, yet everyone is, instead of being focused on those huge, perhaps sometimes dreamlike possibilities, everybody's focused on all the limitations and what you can't do and why you can't do it, and these are the law, and this is what the nation states do, and this is how they tax things, and this is what the politicians say, and that's what the Republican Party, and that's what the all those things are basically fossils that are standing on the way of that new reality trying to be born and express itself in new ways. So, regardless of this, one thing is absolutely clear, and that is that we have come in recent time through an unprecedented shift in that relationship between the human population and the planet. You've seen that other diagram that we had a minute ago that is taken over 300 years, so you see the exponential curve of human population, steep but not as dramatic as this. When you look at it over nearly 10,000 years, you see something incredibly important, and that is that throughout history and until about 300 years ago, human population hugged the two sides of about 1 billion, never more. I think there's some estimation that at the beginning of that time there were maybe 100 million people on the planet, something like that. And the shift from that number of about 1 billion to the 7 or something that we have today is a very sudden and very recent jump. Most people that do future scenarios of population are really arguing about the steepness of that little leap at the end of that curve. which doesn't make any difference because that thing has already happened. Whether they are 7 billion or 8 billion is totally immaterial in the sense that there's absolutely no precedence of managing 7 or 8 or 9 billion people on the planet. And most of our institutions, decision-making apparatus, governance, concepts of the economy, you name it, the value systems, everything that we have are evolutionary systems that were adaptive to deal with a completely different kind of reality. So the thing has already happened, and now we have to figure out how to design for it. And how to design for it is a major challenge, because what it really means that we need to totally reorder human affairs. We have to, in order to really realize a sustainable economy of abundance, requires a complete shift, a complete reorientation in almost everything that we know, in our worldviews, in our structure of the economy, on the values that we hold, on the priorities of human technology, in governance and so forth. And this is not a minor shift. It's like a second-order change. It's change that has to happen not in one or other aspect of the system, but in the system itself. The whole system has to go through a transformation. And this is something that is that thing that I'm referring to here as second-order change is the most difficult kind of change of all that you can experience in personal life, in society, in companies. Anyone who has any experience in working of change in companies knows how, even when everybody understands that some change is needed, to make the real shift, to make the real jump, the real second-order change is a gigantic challenge. But this is the challenge that we face. And I think it's better to begin to see it as a design challenge rather than a political challenge or something else where you're basically manipulating dogmas rather than actually looking at reality, understanding it in a scientific kind of way, and understanding what are the degrees of freedom, what are the possibilities of reshaping it for an increasingly a broader, more comprehensive framework of advantage. I mean advantage for all in that respect. So we just need to really stop and basically rethink everything. Because most of the things that we take for granted just simply will not work here. And that's a challenge that requires a very interesting and, again, unprecedented collaboration. It's not something that one scientist can do alone. It's not something that one person can do alone or one company. It's the first time that the whole of humanity actually has to collaborate in that one major design challenge. So, and what is the objective of this transformation is basically to foster a well-functioning alignment between individuals, society, the economy, and all this regenerative capacity of the planet, life-supporting ecosystem. The biosphere is basically a dynamic system of all these interacting gigantic cycles. The water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, this cycle, that, and it's almost think about it like a meshing cogs in which the human economy and our behavior is one, and how to make sure that we mesh within that thing harmoniously. It's really that what we need to design for. So when you go back to think about that, remember that diagram of interaction of population and environment with all those kind of things. When you look at this, it appeared to me, at least, that you could cluster most of the different variables that are related to that picture. If you resolve it even to a final level that we had before, there's a number of, I've kind of clustered that into 5 key domains. And those key domains are significant because they would yield the basis for 5 principles, if you will. And when you ask why principles, it's really very simple. I remember in the first few years when I was kind of grappling with that idea of principles, there were actually people that I was talking to, many at the World Bank, for example, and other of the multilateral institutions, that basically had the opinion that it's wrong to look for principles because principles will be limiting. and we want to have the freedom of doing anything that we want. The point is that there is no such thing as freedom without some limitation. And very much think about it, if you want to develop you want to fly, and you want to develop some instrument that will take you flying, you better understand the principle of aerodynamics. Otherwise, you'll end up like Icarus and Daedalus. And the same here, if we are really serious about instituting sustainability as a state on the planet, what are the principles that you cannot violate if you want to achieve that? What are the basic limitations that you cannot break in order to make that possible? So I chose to kind of cluster all the different variables in 5 essential domains. The first is the material domain, which is really the basis for regulating the flows of energy and material that underlie all existence. This relates to that, all those principles that I was talking about before, and all that huge reality within which we exist. The second is the economic domain, which really offers the guiding framework for defining, creating, and managing wealth. What is wealth? Is it how much money you have in the bank, or how you organize your resources, how much advantage you get of every molecule that you use, and so on. The third is the domain of life, which really provide the basis for appropriate behavior in the biosphere. We are not here alone. There are many other species that we are neighbors to, and very bad neighbors in that regard. So how will you behave in the biosphere? I think the next one is the social domain, which is the basis. What is the basis for social interaction? And the fifth is the spiritual domain, which really provide identify the necessary value orientation that has to be the ethical basis for all of this. Now, something interesting about this, when I began to work on this, it was very easy to come to terms very quickly with those 4 first ones. And for a while, I was feeling that there was something missing, until I realized that what was missing is the underlying value system, the spiritual orientation. And when I was kind of consulting with people about that framework and so on, getting advice and so forth, everybody was telling me, don't even touch that notion of spirituality, because if you want to be taken seriously by leaders in business and government and so forth, and you start talking about spirituality, you'll look like some hippie or something. And so I would take it in and out, kind of depending on the audience, until I realized that without the spiritual orientation, all the other stuff is only techniques. It's how you do things. And the spiritual orientation is the one that provides the basis for what you do and why you do it in the first place. And that's why it's so important to get back to it. Now, each one of those generate a principle, which is I'll talk about in a minute, and we'll have to do it shortly so that we have some time for discussion. Each one of those generates a principle. Each one of this has a whole lot of kind of operational implications, if you will, and each one of these, as you will see, is violated all over the place in the way that we are acting now. So the first is the material domain. Remember that kind of the underlying basis of energy and matter and so forth. And what is important to say about this is that this is the part of reality that is not subject to our whims. It's not subject to our control in the sense that it's completely determined, so to speak, by what we call the laws of physics, for example. Right? These are not man-made laws. They don't reflect our capricious wishes. They are universal laws that apply anywhere in the cosmos, incidentally, which is another fascinating thing. What we can observe from and on Earth is applicable everywhere. The 92 chemical elements, that again, only very recent phenomena of understanding the table of chemical elements, are the same building blocks everywhere in the cosmos. There's no exception to them. So these are things that have no exceptions. We cannot arbitrarily change them, and they relate to things like concepts like their interchangeability, of energy and matter, E equals mc squared. Remember that one, the first law of thermodynamics, the deal with the conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created or lost, only can be intertransformed, right? What we talked about earlier. And the second law of thermodynamics, we talked about the direction of energy event toward increasing entropy, again on a statistical basis. Now, here is where the connection to what we talked about earlier is so important, because this is where the application, the ability to apply that mind over matter business, the ability to apply concept, to rearrange and reconfigure that reality is so important. And the possibility of arresting, you cannot eliminate entropy, obviously, but you can live in a more or less entropic way. And the point is that our current industrial infrastructure is entirely wasteful. I mean, some people compute that 95% of every oil barrel that we burn is going up in smoke and heat. So we get 5% efficiency of the resources that we use, which is obviously a very, very, very poor kind of state. That's what I meant when I said earlier that we are entirely entropic. And there are a few measures like this that have emerged in recent years that give us a very good example about how wasteful everything that we do actually is. And that wastefulness is another force that manifests itself in all those issues that we talked about earlier, like climate change, biodiversity, all of those kind of things. So the first principle says, contain entropy. You cannot eliminate it, but you want to contain it as much as you can by good design. Again, that's what good design, we said, is all about. Contain entropy and ensure that the flow of resources through and within the economy is as nearly non-declining as permitted by physical law. You cannot eliminate waste altogether, you cannot eliminate entropy, but there are degrees of freedom of how you can contain and control it. So you want to make sure that the physical processes that we put in place are as, I don't want to use the term efficiency, but are as anti-entropic as possible. And this, incidentally, is a very powerful concept when you think about it, but because that notion of entropy can actually supply for us a new measure for the whole economy. I can conceive of a situation where you measure your economy by the degrees of how entropic it is. And you can every year kind of make a picture, right? Where are we in the entropic scale? And stimulate activities that will reduce it. So that, of course, has a number of very important implications. It has to do with really a kind of radical resource productivity, which is the opposite of being wasteful, right? The notion that Fuller was always talking about of doing more with less. Every time you bring a molecule around, because now you also recycle, right? You don't just use them, you want to preserve your molecules. You take them out of the ground and put them into this, but you don't want this to end up in a landfill, which is usually where it ends up. You want to be able to get those molecules back, and because now you're smarter, you've learned more, you know how to use that molecule better next time around. So doing more with less, it can be really the leverage capability of moving from 1 billion to 7 billion. Even if we double that 5% efficiency we talked about earlier, it will be a whole revolution kind of thing. So things like that, the moving to income sources of energy rather than using the capital. We have, again, it's a beautiful image that Fuller used to have, that we have the Earth is in the right proximity to a gigantic nuclear reactor, the sun. And we just need to learn, and this is the most abundant source of energy that we have. The amount of energy that falls on Earth every day is hugely larger than all the energy that we consume every time. But we haven't learned, like the plants, how to use it, how to hook into it more directly. So using income energy, the whole business of closed-loop productions, where you eliminate waste by connecting every output to a necessary input in a real ecosystemic, like a rainforest, right, where there's no waste. Everything is nutrient for something else, and so on. This is an incredible and very interesting design problem, how to reconfigure the whole industrial production system such that things are connected rather than fragmented and isolated. So you have a continuous flow of material and minimizing waste in that totality. The things is the whole notion of moving to service orientation, where you don't buy and own thing, but you pay for use. Right? Think about the connection there. If you're a manufacturer and you don't sell the computer, you lease it, you have the whole economy shifts to turning things around and leveraging the doing more with less. Right? You own these molecules, you get them back after 3 years, now you reconfigure, instead of 100 molecules, you use only one. And this is where you create your wealth, kind of thing. So these are some of those operational implications, just to touch on a few of that first principle. So next to the next domain, the economic domain, and the economic domain is very challenging, and it's challenging because the whole economic accounting system that we are using today. I don't mean accounting as when you go to an accountant, but what is it that we measure in economic activity is completely distorted. Now, when you think about economy, economies consist of markets. And markets have basically two things. They have activity, transactions that are occurring, and they have, let's say it differently, economies consist of two basic things, of transactions and framework of evaluating those transactions. Framework that tell you whether you are making profit or you are losing. And the thing to say there is that those frameworks of evaluating transactions that we treat as though they were of the kind of those natural laws that I talked about earlier, right? The E equals m squared, are basically man-made. We invent them, we impose them, and we can reconfigure them. There's nothing essential about them other than the fact that we agree to believe in them. And a whole redesign has to occur there, because the current framework of evaluating the accounting system that we're using is completely distorted, and it's distorted on a number of dimensions. It's distorting because of the narrow focus on growth measured in financial terms, and of course you know the story of Bhutan with that notion of gross national happiness instead of gross national product. Everybody's laughing about it, but it's a very important concept when you think about it. If only as a kind of shaking the boat and saying, don't only focus on the narrow growth measure that you have. So this is one thing. The accounting system that we're using today are allowing all the externalities. We don't cost the price of depleting resources or of the impact of using those, or pollution and stuff like that. So if you were to most things that we think are cheap are actually very pricey if you were to introduce those externalities. So there's a whole work that needs to be done there in designing a, I don't know, post-capitalist economy that is really able to tell us, give us a real true picture of what is going on. Are we making it, or are we getting, do we only think that we are getting richer while we're getting poorer, which is what is happening a lot today. Of course, the thing has some huge absurdities when you think about it, because the current accounting system allows us many times to treat consumption as though it was profit, right? We take oil off the ground, we burn it, and we count the dollars in the bank and think we're getting richer. And it's a very important concept, because if you were a CEO and you were manage your book like this, you would be put in prison the next day. That's what happened in Enron and those companies, right? That tried to manipulate the capital stock, right, into profit. And yet we treat the whole world economy like this, willy-nilly. So, and of course, all those situations are buttressed by a whole edifice of regulation and subsidies which keeps them in place and make it very easy to shake them off. But this is one of the things that has to change in a big way. So when you think about the economic domain, the fundamental principle says adopt an appropriate accounting system which is fully aligned with the planet ecological processes that we talked about earlier, and reflect the true biospheric accounting to guide the economy. At the moment, we have an economy that is that its measures are completely abstracted and not connected to the physical reality. There are all kinds of tricks and abstract manipulations of illusionary values, and that's of course why we suffer those huge collapses from time to time, because those things are simply not real. All the derivatives and all the stuff that people buy and sell and so on. So on the economic domain, some of the operational implications, you really want to begin to have a comprehensive concept of wealth that goes beyond the financial capital into human capital and natural capital and all the other forms of capital. You want to align the economy with the nature cycles. You want to, there's no reason why we would not embody a measure of well-being. How many smiles per minute could be a very good measure. There's no reason why we should not, and some others. Which brings us to the next one, the domain of life. And here, the thing that I can say about this as an introductory thing is that the adaptive success of humanity on the planet has really come at the tremendous cost of most other species. The rate of destruction, and I'm sure aware of it, the rate of destruction of other species and habitats has been becoming crazy. I mean, when you have, think about it, when you have a report from the UN that says that if we continue with fishing practices that we have today, in 30 years there'll be no life left in the oceans. Now, this is a huge, huge statement. Of course, no life in the ocean really means no life at all. But just the fact that human activities and the rate that we fish can threaten that thought reality is huge. I actually had a very interesting experience myself a couple of years ago. I joined a friend of mine who was sailing around the world for about a month, crossing part of the Pacific, basically sailing from French Polynesia through Cook Islands to Samoa. And this fellow is also a very avid fisherman. So when we organized our food supply for that month, we really counted on fishing every day. And we were trailing that whole way. And we caught one fish in a month in that huge ocean. And when you got to Samoa, you realize why. There's this fleets of fishing boats that are basically those huge factories that go out and stay out for about 6 months because they process everything on board, 3 to 6 months. And they run with 30 miles nets that just scoop everything in price. So obviously these are the kind of thing that we cannot continue for long. Now, the notion of biodiversity, of the importance of biodiversity, is not just because it's not nice to kill the cute spotted owl. I think now we understand from science of complexity that complex systems, the stability of complex systems depends on their variety, on their diversity, on their large number of things. You can understand why, because the more varied the system is, the more it has the possibility of reconfigure itself when the context where it exists changes, right? So if you have a typical switch, it only has 2 positions. So if you want gradations, it cannot deal with this very well. And the stability of life as a system on the planet depends on that variety, on that huge number of interacting possibilities. And what we are doing, we are kind of, we are turning that high diversity system into a monocultured system. That's truly in terms of species, in terms of culture, in terms of as you travel around the world today, you have Starbucks and Hilton and something, and everything is the same. It's really disastrous because you're creating a brittle system, and a brittle system, all you need is a small variation in its context and it will collapse because it will not have the ability to reconfigure and reshape itself. So some of the implications to the here are quite obvious, almost none. You need to assume a stewardship. Because we understand that, we need to take the stewardship responsibility for other forms of life. And the first thing that it means is to really never harvest beyond the regeneration capacity, which is what we're doing all over the place, with forests, with fish, with everything else, all species. It really means that is absolutely important to conserve the variety of the gene pool. I didn't say the principle itself. So the principle itself is quite simple: ensure that the essential diversity of all form of life on the biosphere is maintained. This is a really absolute. You have to look all the time, and each time you see that you've reduced that gene pool, you know that you've done something that is irreversible. You see, some of the big disasters that we'll still experience with climate change may be very disastrous. You'll have to invest a lot to reverse them and so forth, but there are some mitigation possibilities and there'll be some reversal. But a gene pool, once it disappears, and there's no more, so to speak. And the whole regeneration of the continuous regeneration of the life system depends on maintaining that internal variety. So once again, in addition to the couple of things that I mentioned again, you want to conserve that variety, and one of the intricate design that are more related to your field implication is how to reshape human habitat so it doesn't really sprawl all over the place. There's obviously many spatial configurations that are possible other than just taking over everything that exists and cutting off all the biodiversity corridors and so on, which is happening all over the planet. The fourth is the social domain. And the thing to say about the social domain, there are a few things there which are interesting. One, there are three concepts that I want to share with you. One is that in the 30s, largely in Europe, around the Vienna School and so forth, some scientists and philosophers of science began to talk about the fallibility, the fundamental fallibility of human knowledge. Not because we are stupid, but the nature of knowledge itself is such that it's fallible. It's well expressed in Gödel theorems. It's a whole theoretical thing that we don't need to go into, but the fact is that the nature of knowledge is such that it cannot be complete. And what it means is that no one can argue that I have the last words, that what I know is the ultimate truth about reality. And that's what all human groups have been doing and fighting on forever. I've got the truth, and unless you listen to me, you're in trouble, kind of thing. So that fallibility is fundamental, and it means that we need to respect the existence of different species of concept, almost in a truly ecosystemic fashion. The other one is, of course, that society, like an ecosystem, like a biodiversity thing, if anything, is a complex system, and therefore you want to be able to maintain its internal diversity, its variety of expressions, and so on. And the last, of course, is that all the work that was done in recent years on mapping the gene pool, the human genome, indicates that there's absolutely no basis for assuming differences between what we call what's the name? Different. Race. I can't hear. Races, right. That in fact there are more differences within races than between races. So any notion that this race is inferior and this one is superior is totally absurd. And all of those three ideas kind of reinforce the notion that there's still kind of fragile idea that the open processes and plurality of expressions and open structures or dynamic structures are what should be the cornerstone of social reality. And some of the implications there are obviously things like tolerance, universal rights. I don't know if you're familiar with the United Nations thing about human rights. It's one of the most beautiful, perhaps, expressions that came out of it, and yet we violate it everywhere, every day and everywhere. So think about human rights in the sense of each one that is born on the planet owning stock in planet Earth Inc., so to speak. There's so much to do in that arena. The notion of inclusion and democracy, equitable access to resources. I think now, as you know, about 20% of humanity uses about 85% of the resources. Those are not things that can, again, it's not just a simple-minded, not nice to do, but it's a totally unstable system. It cannot work like this. There's no way that you can have pockets of huge wealth surrounded by huge poverty, because these are fractures, right? Instabilities in a system, and in social systems, instabilities manifest itself usually in violence, and I'm sure that we'll see increasing degrees of violence around the world as we see today. A lot of the eruptions in the last week, I mean, everybody can focus on that movie about Muhammad and so forth, but it's really the frustrations of large segments of humanity that are kept away from the mainstream, and it will keep bursting like this, I think, many times. So the social principle says, I promise you we'll finish very quickly, maximize degrees of freedom and potential self-realization of all humans without any individual or group adversely affecting others. Now this, of course, smacks of the basic golden rule, you know, don't do unto others what you don't want done to you. And it's interesting that that is an expression that exists in every single different tradition, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or this or that or the other. All the different wisdom traditions have come to that conclusion long ago. This is the fascinating thing, that we have all the ingredients of the equations, but we don't put that equation together. And that's part of the challenge that we have there. And of course, to move to the last one, the spiritual domain, which, as I said before, is perhaps the most significant in the sense that it's really the center of gravity that holds all the others together. But what's important there, that the human spirit really constantly seems to seek to transcend limitations, whether they're physical or psychological, whatever limitation. It's one of the dynamism that move humans, is that continuous agitation of reaching beyond, reaching for the beyond, and that constant drive to reach to a reality beyond what the current limitations are. It really has this way of taking increasingly more into your field of vision, right? You're seeing so far, now you want to integrate larger, and integrating larger and larger realities. It's a very interesting concept when you think about it, the concept of enlightenment or the bodhisattva in Buddhism, right? It's a being that has moved from seeing his ego as his reality into all the way to taking care of all sentient beings. So how comprehensive your fundamental concept is what makes for the difference. And when the difference is allowed to manifest itself in the way that we behave in the world, it makes all the difference between kind of a greedy way of behaving to more self-restraint. You know, here the whole world is sacred to my people. It means you don't just go and kill everything, because these are sacred things. And if you go hunting and you kill a deer, you thank it for allowing you to do so. You don't just decimate everything in sight. It's the difference between egocentric to inclusive reality, the difference between predatory to nurturing, all of those kind of things that we need to integrate into our spiritual orientation. That is the absolute must be behind the thing. So you've got those 5 principles here. Or the 5th principle, I perhaps went a little bit overboard here, and what the 5th principle says, recognize the seamless dynamic continuum of mystery, wisdom, love, energy, and matter. It's really there, you know, when you think about all those pictures that we started with from all those cosmic things, they are connected. I mean, these are the supernova that explodes somewhere else really produce the heavy elements that are part of your body today. So we are really stardust in the way that some people have been talking about. And that links the outer reaches of the cosmos with our solar system, our planet, and the biosphere, including all humans, with our internal metabolic system and the externalized technology. You realize that much of technology can be seen as externalizing your metabolic system and amplifying it, and embody this recognition in universal ethics that guides human actions. The last word perhaps to say here is that it's very important to realize that those five principles really have to be seen as an integrated whole. You cannot separate them. You have to separate them verbally when you talk about them. But they are one in this case, one tetrahedron, where you have the four, if you were in the apexes, and the value system as the center of gravity that holds it all together. So the whole system aspect is absolutely essential here. Now, if you look around, many of the best of the kind of sustainability development project around the world would tend to focus on one aspect or another. Some focus on energy, some focus on water, some focus on women, some focus on children, some on poverty, some on this. And no one integrates the whole into that totality. And that integration is extremely important. And that integration has to be accomplished independent of scale. That project that we're doing, that the lab is doing with a group of Bedouins in the Negev in Israel, that I'll talk to whoever will be there tomorrow of you, is an attempt to manifest on the ground that very abstract ideas in a small microcosm, to integrate all those five dimensions in one manifestation of development. So the spiritual dimension is fundamental. You need a balanced integration of the whole as an essential thing. And this is basically, you can look at it as a single holographic reality, that each one of those domains reflects all the others, right? So each one is made by all the other four, so to speak, and they continuously affect each other, like that cycle of the sustainability thing that we started with. And I'd like to end with a quote from my great teacher, Fuller. And this is what I think is our sustainability design challenge: to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time, through spontaneous cooperation and without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone. Thank you very much.